After the plane crash, the girl did not regain consciousness for 7 weeks, and doctors said that she would never get out of bed. Big sport has given the world many inspiring stories, and Roman Kostomarov, the Olympic champion in ice dancing, is writing one of them right now. In January 2023, he was admitted to the intensive care unit with severe complications after pneumonia, and a few days later, sepsis began due to infection. In order to stop its spread, doctors were forced to amputate the skater's feet and hands. For several months, Kostomarov was on the verge of life and death, but closer to spring he began to recover rapidly. Soon he was discharged from the hospital. After a long separation, Kostomarov met with the children and admitted that all the worst was left behind for him. Now he is actively training, gaining strength, and does not lose hope of one day going on the ice again. And even prosthetics will not prevent him from doing it. None of the Olympic champion's close friends and colleagues doubts that he will succeed because athletes are special people. Sometimes the desire to win seems to give them wings. So it was with the American runner Betty Robinson. She dreamed of Olympic gold so much that she was able to go the distance even after she miraculously survived a plane crash and learned to walk again. It is now customary to give children to big sports almost from infancy, and in the days of Betty Robinson, they started training much later. So she herself became interested in running only in high school. Robinson's physical education teacher, Charles Price, insisted on devoting her life to athletics. Somehow Betty was late after school. She was late for the train, so she rushed to the station as fast as she could and jumped into the car at the last second before departure. The teacher who witnessed this impromptu sprint was struck by her speed. He realized that the girl's talent needed to be developed so that one day she would get a chance for a better future. Betty Robinson's first competition was the Illinois Regional Club Tournament. Her rivals were real record holders, so you could not dream of gold, but the girl still showed an excellent result and loudly declared herself. Women then rarely played sports. There was almost no competition for a place in the U.S. national team, so the schoolgirl got into the main squad without any problems. She had several months to prepare for the upcoming 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam, and Betty succeeded. They did not set unattainable goals for her. The main thing was not to shame the honor of the country, but Robinson showed an incredible result. At her first games, she, a 17-year-old girl with a short haircut, became the best. The athlete won the gold in the 100-meter dash. That year, the medal in this discipline among women was played for the first time in history. It was the happiest day in young Betty's life, but it could turn into a nightmare for her. Already at the stadium, changing into the national uniform, she realized that she had taken 2 left sneakers with her, and she did not have time to return to the hotel. The girl already thought that she would disgrace herself, but the coach managed to bring her other shoes, and the athlete was saved. The triumph at the Olympics finally convinced Betty Robinson that she needed to continue playing sports, and she approached this matter with full responsibility. The girl returned to her homeland and made a training plan, a very ambitious one. In 1932, she wanted to repeat her success at the home Olympics in Los Angeles, and by 1936, she had to become a coach and lead her first pupil to gold. However, reality intervened in her dreams. There was a year left before the Games in Los Angeles, so Betty Robinson devoted every free minute to training, running, working out on simulators, and running again. She didn't want to be distracted by anything, but one day a cousin of the athlete, who was a self-taught pilot, suggested that she fly a biplane. At first everything went well, but then suddenly the plane's engine stalled and it crashed from a height of 200 meters. Brother Robinson escaped with fractures because he landed on swampy ground, but she herself was in such a serious condition that everyone thought she was dead. Betty was lying in the grass and bleeding. Her leg was broken in 3 places, her left arm was twisted unnaturally, and there was a deep wound under her eye. A random passerby who saw the girl, considered her dead, put her in the trunk of a car and took her to the morgue. Fans of the athlete lamented that life turned out to be so unfair to her. Her relatives had already managed to pick up a coffin for her and began to organize a funeral, as doctors noticed that Betty was weak, but still breathing. She was immediately sent to the hospital, but the forecasts were far from the most optimistic. Betty didn't regain consciousness for 7 long weeks. In general, Robinson herself admitted that she had not been attracted to relay races before. She loved individual races. But after the fall, she looked at this view differently. Montello explains, "Now her teammates have become women for her who have made huge sacrifices to get what they have. and she had to be one of them. In the 4,100-meter relay, Robinson started third. When the baton was in her hands, the U.S. national team was hopelessly losing to the Germans. They were especially inspired to win. Adolf Hitler himself was watching them from the podium. Betty tried to save the situation, but nothing happened. Helen Stevens, who was the last in the four, started with a big gap from Ilse Dorfield. And then the inexplicable happened. Dorfield, for some reason, shifted the wand from hand to hand and dropped it. That is, she violated the immutable rule of the relay. This should be followed by disqualification and the hostesses of the competition, despite the disgruntled cries of the Führer waving his arms, were not spared. The U.S. team was declared the winners, and Robinson became a two-time Olympic champion. Immediately after the triumph, the runner retired from the sport, this time for good. She was 35 years old. At that time, the American press was closely following her compatriot, and when it became clear that Betty would still get to Berlin, the headline appeared on the cover of the New York Times. Betty smiles. But Betty didn't go to Berlin to smile. She was driving to escape. No wonder they still keep photos of the parades that were held several times in New York and Chicago in honor of Robinson in the 1930s and 1940s. And in one of the museums of the state, you can still see a gold pendant, a silver cup, and a diamond watch, which Betty was awarded at home after the victory. In 1971, the U.S. Olympic Committee inducted the athlete into the Hall of Fame. Montello is surprised it didn't happen sooner. Betty has opened the doors for all athletes. She showed that athletics can be fun and dramatic at the same time. This should motivate, she wrote. In general, in Robinson's life, everything happened in spite of. And every time it seemed that she had had enough, something always happened. The latest trials, oncology, and Alzheimer's disease, turned out to be beyond her. Betty died in 1999, a couple of months before her 88th birthday. Training was hard. She tried every possible rehabilitation system that was available at that time. But the knee stubbornly refused to obey. Although the athlete regained her former speed, she could not compete because she could not squat down. A low start was a mandatory requirement at that time. The American realized that she was unlikely to be able to reach the previous level, but she did not give up. In the relay, only the first athlete in turn started from a low start. To become the second, third, or last in the Olympic team, the only way Robinson could get to the Games again. But the competition for the national team in 1936 was really tough, and there were enough contenders to get into the relay team. At the same time, at the last moment, it turned out that they would have to go to Berlin at their own expense. The U.S. Olympic Committee funded only the men's team, so some of the athletes were eliminated. Betty didn't have enough money either. All the family's funds were spent on treatment. In addition, the Great Depression was in full swing, and the girl's father lost his main source of income, a job in a bank. However, the athlete was not going to give up her dream. She got a job as a secretary and worked all her free time from training. And she also sold an Olympic gold medal. That was enough. Betty still got into the team. Open craniocerebral trauma, fractures of bones, eye injury, dislocation of vertebrae. Doctors were able to save Robinson's life, but with 100% guarantee claimed that she would never be able to get out of bed. They performed an operation on the athlete's leg and inserted a metal spoke into the bone. Because of this, the girl's limb became several centimeters shorter, and Betty was also tormented by constant pain. No matter how much Betty dreamed of another Olympic medal, she knew that her career was over. Robinson gave up and spent whole days just sitting in her room with the windows closed. She was cared for by her stepbrother, who was hurt to look at the torments of a loved one. He talked a lot with the girl, then began to take her out for walks, and a few months later insisted that the champion run. Her body did not obey, the pace was terrible, but Robinson realized that she had already surpassed herself, and all the doctors who had predicted a wheelchair for her were wrong. Yes, Betty had a lot of work ahead of her. Yes, because of the injured knee, she could no longer perform a low start. But there were other options. Robinson began to train, and her goal was very clear: the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. By that time, largely because of herself, who popularized athletics, the competition in the U.S. national team had become much more serious, but the girl had passed the selection. Here she faced another problem. The team management was ready to pay for a trip to Germany only for male athletes, and women had to cope on their own. Then Betty got a job as a saleswoman, saved every spare cent, but there was still not enough money for tickets to the ship. However, this was not a reason to give up the dream. The American sold her first gold medal, so now she definitely needed a second one. And she became a real gift of fate for Betty Robinson. The fact is that at the Berlin Olympics, the U.S. women's national team was not doing well, to put it mildly. In all the preliminary races, they lost to the Germans, so they did not go to the start in the best mood. When there was almost no chance of winning, one of their main rivals dropped the baton from scratch, and the team was disqualified. That's how the Americans won gold. Standing on the podium, Betty smiled, and after returning home, she announced the end of her sports career. There was no need for her to overcome herself and endure constant pain. However, Betty Robinson did not manage to part with sports forever. She could not, as she dreamed, raise an Olympic champion, but for many years she worked as a judge at competitions. In 1939, Robinson married Richard Schwartz, the owner of an upholstery company. They lived happily and raised 2 children together. Parades were held in honor of the athlete. She had her own museum where her awards were displayed, and in 1971, the U.S. Olympic Committee inducted the runner into the Hall of Fame. In 1996, Betty Robinson participated in the Olympic torch relay in Atlanta, and 3 years later she was gone. The athlete, who proved to the whole world that nothing was impossible for her, suffered from Alzheimer's disease and oncology in the last years of her life. Her heart stopped beating at the age of 87.